And while we're giving it, let's give it a couple more minutes for folks to arrive. I will say we do have a handful of people who are unable to make it tonight. Allison Zirkle is unable to make it. We know that Patricia was probably not going to be able to make it, and Tracy was also questionable. So that's just where we are.
When the meeting was rescheduled, maybe some of the people weren't able to make it. Oh, there's Chloe.
So Eli, I will ask you a question I probably should have asked before, but here we are. We have, I know that the general practice, not practice, but requirement for holding advisory board meetings is 50% of the members plus one, I believe, to have a quorum and conduct the meeting. This is not an official advisory board, so I'll admit I'm a little bit unclear about what the boundaries are around that. So that might be, I would think we might be okay as long as we're not conducting official business, like, approving minutes, taking official votes on things. But look, we are getting Judith, so we're getting there.
Yeah. We need 7 people.
7 would be
hit that number. So we are now at 5. I think I too am not, I don't know, I don't think that has been defined in relation to this meeting, whether or not we are required to have a full quorum to hold the meeting. So I would think because it's not defined, it would be okay to continue, and we can wait and vote on the May minutes at the next meeting.
That makes sense. Well, it is, oh, we are already live. Okay. There's some supper making next to me, so just don't mind all the noises. But I think it's 7:06, so we will go ahead and call this meeting to order. So good evening, everyone, whether you are here on the screen or watching on the YouTube channel. Welcome to our remote regular meeting of the June gathering of the Task Force on Reimagining Public Safety. And of course, we do continue to meet remotely due to public health concerns. And the first item on our list is to have the roll call.
Judith Alvarado.
Present.
Keith Cook. Sujata Bijou.
Present.
Shannon Blue.
Here, sorry.
Thank you. Patricia Harrison. Let us know she probably wouldn't be able to make it tonight. Chloe Johnson.
I'm here.
Rod Jones, Jason Knapp, Tracy Little, Hathaway Pendergrass, Hooper Schultz,
Here.
Mark Xavier, Allison Zirkle.
Welcome, everyone. We are glad that you are with us. And we are going to go ahead and, sorry, our next item, I was about to skip ahead, but item number 2, audience comments not related to the printed agenda. We do have one member of the public here to speak. And Tom, do you pronounce your last name Mullaney or Mulani?
First one, Mullaney.
Mullaney, all right. Welcome. And just it's our practice to try and keep comments to 3 minutes or less. So that's just a boundary. And thank you for being here with us.
Thank you. I'm starting a 3-minute timer right now. And I'm going to tell you right now, I feel very strongly about this. This will come off a little harsh, but I just feel like I have to share my experience with Hillsborough, policing in Hillsborough. So hello, and I'm reading, I wrote it, so it might sound a little stupid. Hello, I am Tom Mullaney. My wife and I moved to Hillsborough in March, but I've long been a fan since I used to work at Gravelly Hill Middle School, and I would enjoy our downtown whenever I had a meeting at Orange High or the soon to be renamed Stanford Middle School. I'm here tonight to speak about our police department's equipment and uniforms. I recently interacted with 2 police officers on my property who were there for a non-violent, non-criminal matter. The officers were courteous, but as they stood in my backyard, I felt a lot of feelings and emotions. One feeling I did not have was that of safety. These officers were dressed like members of an occupying army. Each had multiple weapons. I can only imagine the sheer terror a Black family would feel in the presence of 2 heavily armed white men. I wondered why we have police who dress this way and are so heavily armed. So I reached out to you, Mayor Weaver, who put me in touch with you, Chief Hampton. I appreciate your earnest response that shared the equipment that officers carry from your email to me. Basically, see, I'm halfway through. So pepper spray, taser, certified baton, in addition to handgun. You said, I'm going to paraphrase, you've never seen an instance where a baton was used. Other items that you listed, extra handgun magazines. Yeah, yes, handgun magazines, radio, handcuffs, tourniquet, writing pad, body-worn camera, pocket knife. And I saw this pocket knife is pretty big, flashlight and gloves. I have a lot of questions because of that. Why are officers being asked to carry more equipment than before? Something that you said in your email, in a town with 38 violent crimes and 0 murders in 2019. Why are extra handgun magazines necessary? How does this discourage from firing a gun? Why is a knife not considered a weapon? Why do officers have batons if they're not used? Why do officers have guns when they have so many other non-lethal weapons? Why are we sending armed officers to non-violent situations, especially as Durham has moved toward sending unarmed personnel to these situations? And why are we comfortable with anyone in public having this much ability to do harm? Chief Hampton, in a video that you made that's on the Hillsborough channel with other chiefs in this area, you said, hey, bring it, come to us. Let me get the quote here. We invite you to get to know us, come talk to us, let us listen and learn from you, tell us your concerns, help us serve you better. Only one of the chiefs in that video is wearing a vest, and it was not you, Chief Hampton. What I'm going to say is we don't need pollinator gardens. We need our concerns addressed. And I'd say, let's get rid of these magazines. Let's get rid of as many weapons as possible. Let's have uniforms that make Hillsborough residents and visitors feel safe instead of intimidated. Thank you. That's 3 minutes.
Thank you for joining us, Mr. Mullaney. We appreciate you taking the time and paying attention to the work that we're doing. And just another way of explanation is what's typical when our boards meet, any board in the town, is that for items not on the printed agenda, there isn't necessarily a lot of discussion on that topic, but you have given us something this body might want to approach in a different way through our work. So right now I'm going to say thank you for joining us, and maybe we can, because these are certainly public documents through the public email, maybe we could share the email exchange between Mr. Mullaney and myself and Chief Hampton with the task force in case that's something that this body wants to address in some way. Okay. All right, and thank you for joining us. Okay. So, sorry, I'm just making myself a note to be sure that I come back to that discussion at a different time. Okay, item number 4 is our only item for decision is our minutes from the May meeting. And I'm going to suggest that, oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Eli, that's how we'll proceed. Sorry, having a side exchange. But the we're going to move our approval of the minutes to the next meeting when we're sure that we have a more significant critical mass of folks here to take that official vote. And this meeting was moved from its regular time, which is why I believe we're just struggling a little bit with attendance this evening. So thanks you all for being here. And the next item on our list is a presentation and discussion, which is a synthesis of what we know and possible areas for task force recommendations. And I actually think that this is an okay discussion for us to enter into with a smaller group, because basically what I've pulled together is a review of our major topic areas, the major takeaways, possible topics for consideration. And so we can talk about all of those together. And then I think it'll be okay as we think about how to proceed to pull the other members in as we make groups to forge ahead. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Always exciting when that works quickly. So this is our 6-month review, and I'm just going to go through this month by month. And at the end of each one, we can talk a little bit about, are there, what's missing? What would you like to add? Because certainly this is my interpretation that I'm gathering from the minutes that we have and some of my own notes. So, well, our first meeting was actually, of course, in December, and that was our getting to know you meeting. And then we moved on to January. And in January, Chief Hampton gave a presentation on mental health calls. And so a few key takeaways is that the number of these calls over the past year during COVID increased, and they increased. Oh, this is a question mark I had. I wasn't sure in looking back if they increased in number or in percentage overall. And maybe the answer is both. Chief, I know you just published the annual report. Can you chime in as whether that was an increase in number or overall percentage?
I think it was an increase in both. Eli, do you have a sense? I don't have those numbers at my fingertip. I think it was an increase in both.
I can take a look now, and as people continue to talk, I can report back.
Sure, that'll be fine. I think that's easy to correct or put in the right piece when later on. Thank you.
Okay.
So, but they overall do not comprise a large number of calls compared to other calls. I also hope, this is a side note, that at the end of each section, if any voting task force members or Eli or Chief Hampton see things that I just have plain wrong on here based on your experience in these meetings, please don't hesitate to say so. Okay, then sometimes the HPD will charge someone with this criminal citation, so a non-custodial, to get them into the system to get help. This ties into the next one, which is that officers would prefer not to respond to these types of calls, but do so professionally. And currently there's, this is a unknown number because I know that number has changed. I was looking at the annual report, but that we are trying, HPD is trying to train officers in crisis intervention. That is a priority. And there are just limited tools to get folks the assistance that they need when they are having a mental health crisis. Ways to improve how people experiencing a mental health crisis could be better understood would be helped by data and other input from institutions like Cardinal Innovations and Freedom House, where many of these folks end up getting some assistance. And then African Americans, this was an interesting conversation that we had a lot of insight from Hathaway in his position as both a lawyer and a judge, and from Allison with the work that she also does with the county. But there's a lower percentage of involuntary commitments resulting from mental health calls. So just a question mark is, does this mean they African Americans are less likely to get the help that they need when they're in crisis? I attached this link here. I don't know if people saw this. This might come in handy later when folks are thinking more deeply about this, but this was an article in the News of Orange about that the sheriff put out a few months ago about what they're doing at the county level in this kind of crisis response. So here are the demographics for Hillsborough Police Department. And it is always important to remember that these are very specific to Hillsborough. These are what this police department is responding to within the city limits. So this is not reaching out into the county. And so those are some statistics here in the table. So items to consider: alternatives for response other than law enforcement, more study needed by a future advisory board that's, more permanent. What else? Yeah, Chief Hampton, go ahead.
Mayor, I just wanted to add one thing. The second bullet point there,
Yes.
that is something that happens, but I want to make sure everybody understands that is rare and that's kind of a last option. So I didn't want it to sound like that, oh, we just do it all the time. That's very rare, but it does happen. Cardinal Innovations is probably not going to be part of the future. The county is currently redoing a lot of their mental health stuff. I don't know if it will change anything or not, but just so you know, I can't remember offhand who they are actually looking to go to now, but I think they are getting ready to change that provider in some way.
Thank you.
And if you scroll down to the numbers real quick, when you're done.
Yes.
Right there. I just wanted to point out that while African Americans are still a lower percentage of the IVCs, there's still that disproportion when we compare it to the population. So I think it's just important to frame that conversation. We're seeing the same kind of thing there that we see in other populations and other situations. So thank you.
Thank you. Oh, and I see that Hathaway has arrived. Welcome, Hathaway. Other comments or hi, comments or things to add to this category, be it big main takeaways, key takeaways that you all had from that discussion, or items to consider in thinking about the recommendations part. Okay, seeing and hearing none, I'll keep scrolling. So then in February, we had a presentation from Chief Hampton to answer questions from task force members and help reach a shared understanding of how the police department goes about its duties and why. And this was a very thorough, lots of information presentation. And there were several sections. First one was calls for service, collaboration with other agencies, and visibility. So officers use time responding to calls for service or alternately on self-initiated calls or traffic stops. Presentation included data on types of calls and geotab maps of where in town police are spending time, which I thought those maps were really valuable and interesting to look at. And then there's a heavier presence in areas where there has been known significant previous drug activity or other issues. These areas also have a significant African-American population as compared to other parts of town. This discussion led to a specific question about Gateway neighborhood that Shannon raised, and that there was less police presence there than in the past. And then there was a follow-up analysis by Chief Hampton showing that this concern had merit. And then that follow-up was also sent out to the group. Anything to add or change about this first section? And I can't see all of you at the same time, so just feel free to holler out.
Mayor, if I could chime in again, just to that bullet, for the third bullet point,
Yes.
I think, I don't know when we did it, but we also shared some information at some point about aggravated assault calls. Those are kind of those other issues we're talking about, like all the aggravated assaults, they were also falling in those same areas. So just a little more clarity.
Okay, then the next section had to do with department hiring and demographics. So there's been a lot of work done as an agency to increase the number of African-American and Hispanic officers, have had some success, but then those officers have often left for opportunities at other agencies because there's high demand and other opportunities for them. And I did want to pause and see, I know that that's a longer story than this one sentence gives, but Chief Hampton, I did want to ask if you feel like that adequately captures the summation of those efforts for our purposes of key takeaways.
Yes, it's an ongoing thing. Competition for candidates, and especially diverse candidates, is challenging.
And then there's also in the newly published annual report, you can see the current demographics. And the department tries to be choosy about hiring, looking for quality candidates that are also a good fit. Shannon, yes, go ahead.
Yes, I just had a question. So with all the high demand, what are y'all trying to do different to bring more diversity to the police department in Hillsborough?
You want me to go ahead and try and answer that? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Why not? Go
it's a good question. I mean, obviously we're recruiting and we've been very successful in the recruiting because like I said, we've had a lot of folks come through the department. It's just hard because everybody's chasing an extra dollar. We've had folks leave. The biggest reason we've lost folks is for, when I say other opportunities, they're going to some of the larger agencies where they can go do more cool, fun police stuff than maybe we can offer them, for lack of a better way to put it. They can go to special units. We had one leave because he just didn't like policing in the town that he lived in. That was his challenge. And again, promised opportunities that we simply can't offer. We're continuing to recruit. We're in the process right now of looking at some folks. I actually found out today that we've got one of our former employees who left us and actually left law enforcement. And she's interested in coming, thinking about coming back, which would be really exciting because she misses it. We're constantly chasing, like all agencies, starting salaries, you're seeing those creep up. We've had some discussion as a town about, some of our competing agencies have already outpaced our salaries significantly. Morrisville, for example, just raised their starting salary, their hiring salary, to above $50,000 compared to our 43. That's tough to compete against, and we're going to have to answer. Our biggest thing is we're trying to create an environment that we get folks in here and they make connections and they want to stay. And we've been successful with a lot of people. It's just a constant battle. And, we've brought on a number of Spanish speaking officers in the last year, been very successful there. It's just a challenge right now to find candidates. We just finished a a recruit opportunity, and the pool of applicants, the people we're getting right now especially are very limited in diversity. There are a couple of folks in there that have some diversity. We've tried advertising, we tried to connect with North Carolina Central and NCA&T and trying to get the word out to folks. The biggest thing we need is the community to help us too, though. You folks know people who you would like to see being police officers. We need to talk them into it.
All right, thank you. Okay, next section was on training. And, there was a lot said about this, but I think the key takeaway to distill is that there's a focus on training. Every day is a training day. And one of the key questions that task force members had was about implicit bias training, and there have been opportunities for that. But of course, one of the things that Chief Hampton mentioned is that for the past, a year, and now we're on a year plus, that just training opportunities have been limited because of COVID. So fourth section, internal accountability. Broad definition of complaints, from formal ones to comments on social media. There's an attempt to verify the incident, investigate and correct if the officer is in the wrong, or coach if it could have been or should have been done better or differently. And then there's different stages of disciplinary action, from coaching to job termination, if it was found that there was an issue. Then the next section is body-worn cameras, been worn since 2014, sometimes used for evidence, also used for training and spot checking. And then we also got in a conversation during this part about the community summit, which is an opportunity for the community to come and ask questions of the department and give feedback. And historically, it has not been very well attended. So, items to consider. We know that African Americans are overrepresented in the criminal justice system. We know that in Hillsborough, there are predominantly African American areas and neighborhoods that have more frequent police presence, likely contributing to that overrepresentation. Some residents in those areas have asked for that stronger police presence. And so that creates a conundrum. So how should this conundrum be approached? How can communities have both power and dignity in this consideration? What role might self-initiated patrols be playing in a disproportionate number of non-white people in Hillsborough entering the criminal justice system? And what are suggested alternatives? Are the community summits a good tool? If so, what can be done to improve community engagement? So that's kind of a lot. What else jumps out at people as things that might need to be considered in this list?
I have a note from my notes in this meeting that someone talked about the possibility of hiring non-police co-responders. I don't know if that really fits in items to consider here. It might fit actually better in the items to consider from the last meeting before that, but I just had that written, and it might just.
Well, I'm gonna go ahead and write it down. It does also tie into what our public comment speaker said to us tonight, is asking about different kinds of response. And how did you phrase that in your notes, Hooper?
It's not very eloquent. I just have hire a non-police co-responder.
Oh, right. That's why I see you're getting to the mental health. Sorry. Editing, facilitating, and talking all at the same time.
You're doing a great job.
I don't know why I'm putting that in quotes. I'm gonna start sweating. There we go. I'm gonna just go ahead and take it up and put it in this one also. What else? Anything, other things to add in the items to consider or key takeaways? Okay. Then moving down to March and April, which I have paired together because we had the presentation in March by Dr. Frank Baumgartner from UNC. His expertise is in racial disparities in traffic stops, particularly in the state of North Carolina. And then the next meeting, we debriefed that presentation in the context of Hillsborough with material on Hillsborough traffic stops provided by Chief Hampton. So, list of key takeaways. Racial disparities exist in traffic stop data in every jurisdiction across the state, including Hillsborough. So this is a widespread, entrenched problem. Dr. Baumgartner asks us to consider whether using the traffic code as a pretext for criminal investigations is of value to our community. Number of arrests resulting from these types of non-safety stops are low, but alienation of the African-American community can be profound. And I should say that I'm predominantly talking about the African-American community, but there were similar but not as pronounced effects for the Hispanic community as well. So I just want to know that we should remember that piece too. The greatest disparities in traffic stop data for Black men are in discretionary searches, where only 10% result in an arrest. In localities where consent to search forms have been implemented, probable cause searches have increased. The city of Fayetteville has tried reducing investigatory stops, and they've had some success. About a third of officers in the state are what he calls outlier officers that have even more extreme rates of racial disparity in traffic stops. And someone asked the question, are those officers concentrated in particular jurisdictions? And his answer was no, they're pretty much kind of scattered across the state. Then specific to Hillsborough traffic stops, African Americans are more likely to be searched, more likely to be arrested. The disproportionality for African Americans in traffic stops arrest mirrors all arrests, and arrests from traffic stops is a small percentage and mostly result from regulatory or equipment violations. So this data is in line with Baumgartner's presentation. And I'll just also make a note, just a reminder, Dr. Baumgartner mentioned this, and Chief Hampton also mentioned this in the presentation, is that it is important to remember that there is that in Hillsborough, where the numbers are overall very small numbers because we're a small community, and so changes in just a small number can make a big difference in percentages. So I think that's just something for us all to be mindful of as we are looking back at the data, though it does fit the pattern, but changes can swing a lot with just one or two individual differences. Also, we had a good discussion about the driving with a revoked license. That also disproportionately affects African Americans, and most of those are DWRL, that was new lingo for me, DWRL non-impaired. So that means you're not getting your license revoked for being under the influence, it's for some other reason. And that can have a big impact because court costs and fees can really add up for people when it wasn't necessarily a safety hazard that they were presenting to the community, but they did have a revoked license. And then there were two relevant PowerPoint presentations. Hathaway, go right ahead.
Yep, just give the acronym DWLR, driving while license revoked, just for helping us with the acronyms.
Wow, thank you. Okay, items to consider in this topic. Going back to the question that Dr. Baumgartner poses, are investigatory stops making Hillsborough safer? Are they contributing to racially disproportionate contact with police? Are there options or alternatives? how does HPD, this came up in our discussion from a question a task force member had, but how does HPD monitor whether there are outlier officers on our local force, and how might that be approached with evaluation and training? What are options for approaching DWRL non-impaired disparity? Should Hillsborough explore court cost fee assistance, which some of the other local jurisdictions, our neighbors, have been doing for a couple of years? What else to add in key takeaways or items to consider?
Just Jen, this is Judith.
Yes.
And I don't know if this would fit in here, but I was just thinking also about those that can't get a driver's license, like some of the Latino families. So maybe that is something we can also start thinking about, that those people are also, if they're stopped without a driver's license, that affects them a lot too.
Thank you. That's a great point. And now you all get to see that license is one of the words that I have never learned how to spell correctly. So here it is in real time.
Hey, Mayor, could I chime in to Judith's point real quick?
Yes.
Just a quick clarification. The folks who were stopped who are not able to get a license at all are generally charged with no operator's license, NOL. We have done a lot of work at looking at that over the last few years. We actually did a lot of work probably 5 years ago, including writing letters to state elected officials, trying to figure out some way to help these folks that could not get licenses, but otherwise weren't doing anything wrong, were able to drive. But it is one of the things we are aware of and are, have done work trying to improve. I think the district attorney's office, I think they still have a program where if folks get charged with no operator's license, they can go to a training session, and if they present the certificate, they'll dismiss the charge. So the courts, or at least the district attorney's office, have done some programs trying to help with this situation.
Thank you. That's important information. And let me just, Hathaway, in your experience, do you have anything to add to that about how this works in the court system for the no operator's license? If you don't, that's fine.
Yeah, those charges, generally when those are pled to, those are court costs and fine type cases. But what we also see is when folks have been charged with that, most of the people who I see, they actually have insurance on the car. They don't have any other types of regulatory issues. It might just be the license issue.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And again, there's court costs and fees that might be adding up for folks. So that's something to think about. Anything else? Okay, moving on to our May meeting. Hillsborough use of force policies and practices. Key takeaways. Hillsborough has a detailed use of force policy that is not linear. And to be quite honest, I tried to think about how to describe the visual that is in that presentation. And I just couldn't come up with the words to describe it adequately. So I've just got a note here. It's best considered with the visual provided in the presentation, but that it is situation-based with, I'm losing words, so I'm just going to keep going. And I will say when I'm finished with this list, if anyone, including Chief Hampton, has a clear way to explain that, I would be delighted to have it. So HPD has a broad definition of use of force in an attempt to capture incidents that can be used for training. For example, displaying a weapon, even if it's not used, is counted as use of force so that that incident can be examined. if an officer were to shoot someone while on duty, the SBI would be brought in to investigate. This is a practice, not a policy. And I hope that I've captured this accurately. This question was asked in response to what was happening in Elizabeth City at the time, when many in the community there were asking for an outside investigation. And there's talk at the state level of making that mandated. Anyway, so that is a practice, not an official policy.
Mayor, if I could chime in, I mean, it is
Yes.
our policy. It's not a legal requirement, I guess, might be a better way to word that.
Okay.
But here it is our policy,
Awesome.
not an
So-
option.
Okay. So that's written down somewhere as a policy. Okay.
Yes,
Great.
that's
Thank
in
you.
our use of force policy that we'll contact the SBI and they
Okay.
will investigate. But there is not a state requirement of that that's universal across departments.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you.
No, that's great. Okay. And yes, these use of force policies generally are not uniform across jurisdictions. They are unique. And so the one in Hillsborough is unique to us. There's not a cut and dry delineation on what would cause an officer to lose their job for excessive use of force. It would depend on intent, malice, degree, and other factors. It is, Chief Hampton says, it is a liability to have someone on the force who has a sustained misuse of force record. And then other concerns that have come up, from public questions, such as and incidents in other localities, but such as firing warning shots, firing at or from a moving vehicle, chokeholds, which have been a focus elsewhere. These have been addressed in the Hillsborough police policy for many years. And so this references slide 15 on that presentation. I just pasted this right on from the minutes. Items to consider. Are there any practices that could be solidified into policies regarding use of force tactics, investigation, or officer misuse of? I'll say that there wasn't, well, I don't need to editorialize. I'll just say that this is the items to consider list, and what other things come up for people as far as key takeaways or things we might want to think about considering the use of force.
I would say maybe just clarifying what is already there on the items to consider is that it might be worth our while to create a clear delineation of like when an officer would be let go because of this excessive use of force. To have that in writing might be a good thing to have, rather than it always being a by the incident decision-making process. Not that we could not, or that the department could not make decisions based off of other things, but if certain things happen, that it might just be a good idea to have that written.
All right. Anything else? Okay. And also that same meeting, we talked about some models of police oversight boards. Key takeaways: multiple models of varying capacity, power, and complexity. Most of these boards exist in large jurisdictions. There is no shortage of feedback from communities and members of these boards that they rarely operate as intended or expected by the community. The state of North Carolina has significant prohibitions regarding the power of these boards. Some local jurisdictions, at the time it was only Durham, but now Carrboro has instituted this as well, are experimenting with safety and wellness advisory boards, looking at safety more holistically rather than strictly as police oversight. So thinking about a different kind of purpose for an advisory board altogether. So key questions: what is the problem we are trying to solve, or what are the problems we are trying to solve? What type, if any, advisory board is appropriate for the Hillsborough community? What else as far as key takeaways or considerations?
I wasn't here, but I think I saw in the notes that there was a consideration of potentially talking to the boards that are being formed in Durham and Carrboro and Chapel Hill, like task force members reaching out to them to see what we can learn from them. That seems like it could be pretty effective.
the right thing. Anything else?
Mayor, if I could chime in, just to let the group know, one of the groups we're talking to fairly regularly is NAACP, and formation of some sort of community advisory boards is a blanket request they have made of all jurisdictions. So I just wanted to make sure folks were aware of that.
Thank you.
Could I follow up with a question about that?
Sure.
I was just curious if that was just a general recommendation as you stated, or if they added any specificities about it. Sorry, that was bad timing.
Bad timing on my end. You caught me eating a cookie. It is a no guidance has been given. It's one of many things that they have asked for in these discussions, really broadly, not very clearly defined. So I'm not sure if that really answers what you're asking, but it's a general request. They think some kind of board needs to exist in all jurisdictions. And this is the Orange County branches of NAACP.
Anything else? Okay, so just one more time, and this is not a speak now or forever hold your peace. People can certainly circle back with other things to add, but just that brings us up to present day. And anything else to add? I know scrolling actually isn't going to be helpful, so I'll just let that question hang for a moment. Okay, so at the end, oh, go ahead, Hooper.
I'm sorry.
That's fine.
I'm interested. I have notes from this meeting where at some point we talked about that Churton and King are state maintained roads. So we have other jurisdictions who don't have to follow our recommendations, or other departments, still affecting what happens in town and how citizens interact with the police, even when it's not Hillsborough Police Department. And I'm just wondering, I don't know where this really goes, but I think that that's worth talking about more, because even after we make these recommendations, how do we really make sure that our citizens feel safe if they don't even wind up interacting with Hillsborough Police Department officers in town?
Chief Hampton, I'm wondering if you can speak to that a little bit, because I'm not an expert on this. I would think that interaction, I'm having a hard time thinking, because I don't remember that conversation when it came up in the meeting. And I'm like, I know I've seen the highway patrol sometimes, hanging out on Churton Street for reasons I can never really comprehend. So can you just speak to that issue a little bit?
Right. I think it goes back to the presentation where we talked about jurisdictions. Within the town of Hillsborough, there are a multitude of potentially law enforcement agencies that people could come into contact with. And usually when they come into contact with them, they are all thought of as being the police. You have us as the local municipal officers. You have any county officer has jurisdiction. So that's the sheriff's office. You also have some other specialty law enforcement like probation and parole, and some of these other groups that are state or county actors floating around. And then you have the highway patrol that also has the jurisdiction. So there are a lot of potential law enforcement around. They all have kind of different missions and different purposes. But again, you could end up potentially, if the highway patrol, you'll see them in town from time to time, but they really don't do a lot of work in town. Unless there's a special thing they're working on and the town streets just happen to be a better place for them to do whatever it is. If they're working on distracted driving, that's a lot harder to do as somebody's flying up Eflin Cedar Grove Road than it is to see them driving down Churton Street. The sheriff's office, generally, again, they can enforce criminal law in town, but that's not their focus. They'll deal with it if they run into it, but usually they're working on other stuff. So again, it varies a little bit, but you do have a multitude of these different agencies that you can come into contact with in a given day. I mean, the most common, I think, would be us or the sheriff's office. But you do come into contact with the others from time to time. And I don't know how this factors into the conversation in any way, shape, or form. But I think, also a point kind of thinking about this too is a lot of the people that we end up interacting with are not town citizens. It's a lot of folks from out of town and away. So I think it's just something to keep in mind too. How do we get those folks to understand what we're doing, even when we communicate and interact with our town folks? So a multitude of issues. I hope that kind of sort of answered it.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's something I was thinking about is if we make recommendations and the town's police force, is taking those to heart, but then to the Joe Hillsborough citizen on the street, when he interacts with a non-town of Hillsborough law enforcement agency, it doesn't really make a difference to him. And how does this all fit together? Like, how can we ensure that people feel safe in town if they are interacting with agencies that are not necessarily having to follow whatever is decided?
Absolutely. And to your question, I don't think there's anything any town group can do that would apply to these other agencies and how they operate. Likewise, a lot of the sense of unsafety that people feel is also generated by police departments that are not even here in their actions. So that's, that adds another layer of complexity to it.
And I think, so I put that topic plus the topic that Mr. Mullaney brought to us this evening as things to put in the parking lot and to think about whether this group wants to tackle these issues or whether they would go, for a future advisory board to think about more. And thinking, but to follow up on what you're saying, I have two thoughts about that, about this multiple agencies piece. Is one, just to note that, when ICE was doing raids in communities, that just instilled so much fear, justifiably, in the undocumented community that it just, I think, did a number on everyone, because to an undocumented person in our community, there's not a lot of distinction or faith between agencies sometimes. I know that the Hillsborough Police Department has certainly, they've worked hard to build that trust within the undocumented community. But I just think that it's there. And so that's an issue that is tied into this, maybe not as pronounced now as it was in the past, but I don't think that that's something that can necessarily be counted on. And then on that piece is, if this, whatever recommendations that this task force chooses to present to the town board, whatever is adopted by the town board, can always be, sent out to the sheriff's office, to the highway patrol, to those other agencies that are in Hillsborough, just to say, this is what we have chosen to do in our community. We are just letting you know that this is what our community has decided. So, it's certainly not binding, but it would be, a statement that this is what we're doing here. So moving forward, we've got these 5 areas of focus: the mental health calls, HBD practices, traffic stops, use of force, and the advisory board model. Excuse me. At the end of our last meeting, we had a discussion about how, what the best way would be to kind of have a deeper discussion and really get to what some recommendations are. And the takeaway from that is to split into smaller groups and consider some of the topics and then come back together, which I think does seem like the most effective way to proceed. Especially as we still meet in Zoom. I think it makes things a little more challenging when we're in a bigger group. So there's a few decision points. One of them being how many groups. So we usually have, I believe, that there's 13 official members right now, 13 voting members of the task force. And that's just a reminder for anyone who might be watching this, is that I do not vote and Chief Hampton does not vote. And of those 13, there's, I think we have a solid 10. And I'm just trying to remember, because I really meant to go back and look at to get a firmer number, but a solid 10 who really were sure you could keep meeting, into the fall. So that brings us to, do we want to have 3 or 4 small groups of, just a couple people, or 2 slightly larger groups? So thinking of, would we want to, and I'm really open to suggestions and ideas. So everything I say is really to give us a starting place, because I think it's easier to work off of something than to just start from scratch. So what I would propose is that we take these 5 topics, divide them in some way that seems to make sense, and then parse them out to groups, either groups of 2 or 3, or to 2 different groups of, 5 or 6. So let's start with that general question. I'm interested to hear what your reactions are of what you think would work. Hathaway.
I like the idea of doing the 3 people or so and taking a little bit smaller rather than the 2 larger groups. Just for, but the other piece of that is the folks who are doing, and whatever topic you have, obviously those 2 or 3 individuals will be expected to come up with something, knowing that it's a little more pressure on those few individuals. But I like the idea of the smaller group rather than 2 5-person groups or 2 6-person groups, whatever the number is.
All right, Hooper.
I mean, I agree. I like the idea of doing the smaller groups, because I think that it would allow people to get more down and dirty with the information. But I have to say that I would worry that with the smaller groups that we're not going to have enough people putting in the time and weight. I mean, I think tonight might be an example of that, but also we did switch the time. So my vote would be for the larger 2 groups, just because I would worry that we wouldn't have enough manpower.
I have a question about the process. I don't know if you all talked about this, but something you said, Mayor Weaver, made me think that the smaller groups would be meeting during the already scheduled meeting time for, I think, July 8th. And then we would come back together as a larger group, or would these smaller groups need to schedule meetings at a different time?
That's a great question and not one we have discussed.
Okay.
I think, just what do I think? I think that is an option. Maybe Hathaway, it looks like you might have more formulated thoughts than I do. Why don't you go ahead?
Well, looking back at what Hooper was saying too, and looking at the actual areas, I think what we could do, if we did something like 2 5-person groups, we could each group could take 2 topics. That 5th topic is kind of like all of us could think of those in whatever group. So it's essentially like taking 2 topics, and then the last one, anything that specific group wants to bring up that hasn't been brought up. I think we could do it that way. So that goes back to the original question. So I've changed my mind. I've gone back where I like Cooper's idea, because I think the way that makes sense. For me personally, I think what we could do is we could utilize. I would say if the small groups are gonna meet, the small groups meet on maybe during a month when our group isn't going to meet. So if we and we could, whether it has to be this exact same time, I'm not wed to that, but rather than multiple meetings, which sometimes can be difficult for folks, I think, if we not take the summer off, but to say like next month the meeting will be in the small groups, and then we come back in August to meet, or whenever the next meeting would be. That's just my opinion.
I actually think that's a really good idea, in part because we changed this meeting. The next, if we met as a big group in July, that would be in just 2 weeks. And I don't really, I don't think anyone would be, ready to make any grand pronouncements at that time. So I just want to be sure I've got you. So what you're thinking is to split into 2 groups, and then that way there's a higher confidence that there will be, a critical mass of folks that are really able to put the time into thinking about these. And each of those groups will take 2 of these top 4, and then everybody will think about the last one. I'm seeing nodding of heads, raising of thumbs. Sujata and Judith, I can't see you. That sound okay to y'all?
Yes,
sounds
that's okay with me.
Okay, great. All right.
Mayor, if I could just
go ahead.
chime in one piece. Obviously, as these groups, however they come together, we will be available for questions, follow up, what have you, but I am going to be unavailable for the last 2 weeks of July. So I just want to make sure everybody knew that. I'm not going to be accessible. Thanks.
Vacations, real vacations are very, very important. So we understand that. But thank you for letting us know. And then as I scroll, Hathaway, you can see I was already on the same page and thinking about the timing here. So really, these 2 small groups would have until our August 12th meeting to be processing this and getting together. And then, well, I'm just going to keep going down this, and then I'll get to my other thought that just came up to me. So materials, we've had so many presentations, there's minutes, we've got our own notes. I really want to remind folks that life and professional experience, matters. That's why you're serving on this body. So that's really valuable. And then The Hillsborough Police Department annual report was just put up. Then also the governor's task force recommendations, the NAACP requests, and Chapel Hill just came out with their report yesterday. And so one of the things, I haven't had the time to fully digest these, really these things here, these last four, but the governor's recommendations or task force recommendations, the NAACP requests, and the Chapel Hill recommendations, from scanning them, there is already just so much overlap with the things we've been talking about. So that's just assuring that, you know, that this group is on the right track, thinking about the same things other communities are thinking about. And I think that bodes well for the broader Orange County community, because, you know, we all move throughout these communities together. And it could be, as we've discussed before, that there are places to work together, collaborate, things like that. One thing I will note about the Chapel Hill recommendations that you might notice when you have a chance to look at it is that their scope was a little bit broader. So they do say some things in there about, you know, the importance of affordable housing, you know, things like this that are on the front end that make it more likely for people, help people avoid, you know, having life circumstances where they find themselves, you know, caught up in the criminal justice system. So this group didn't have that broad of a scope, but I just wanted to make a note of that. Okay. So responsibilities. I just want to emphasize that it's really important that the recommendations come from task force members. And the issues to consider that, you know, I drafted here, they're not mandates, and there may be and probably are, you know, other issues in each area that aren't mentioned here that will come up when you're talking amongst yourselves. And I have myself and Eli, we can provide support, connect you to information, set up meetings if needed. And Chief Hampton, as he has already volunteered to provide follow-up info and answer clarifying questions. So let's remember that Chief Hampton will be out of town. And Eli, you will also be out of town some of July, is that right? Am I remembering correctly?
I'm out of town the first 2 weeks of August.
Oh, August, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And my name is spelled V-A-L.
It sure is. Sorry.
No worries. So I couldn't, it just was distracting. So yeah, I'm planning to try to host the August 12th meeting from out of town. That's my plan. And I'll work on setting that up and doing a test run to make sure that I can do that beforehand. So if for some reason that needs to change, we'll know ahead of time.
Okay. All right. And we can connect on that.
Mayor, I'm sorry,
yes.
it just dawned on me. What's the date of the August meeting?
I believe it's August 12th, if I was looking at the calendar correctly, which is not guaranteed.
That is correct.
Okay.
Eli, that doesn't conflict with National Night Out, right?
No, National Night Out is August 3rd.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. And then the last thing is just to remember that word, reimagine. If you have an idea or vision, don't be afraid to offer it. You're not expected to know intricacies of town operations or state law. And just to say a little bit more about that, one of the things that's helpful about the governor's task force, I don't know if anyone else has had the chance to look at that document, but is that it has the jurisdiction that applies, like the body that would address, and theirs is a very long list. So I found that helpful as far as thinking about, you know, some of who does what in the state of North Carolina. And you don't have to be experts in these focus areas to make recommendations or offer ideas, because, you know, the point is to have members of the community, you know, reacting to all this information, thinking about what public safety really means. So, you know, we could study each of these things for a year, you know, if we felt like we needed to be experts, but I don't think that that's really the point. And then when it comes to back to the idea of, ideas and vision, is that when recommendations are made to the board, it could be that things, it might be that something isn't possible the way it's been written, but that the board might say, okay, we can't do that, or working with the town manager and Chief Hampton, maybe we can't do that exact thing, but let's see how we can get to as close to whatever that is we can. So I think I don't want people to feel held back don't feel held back. And then backing up a little bit, first of all, let me pause. Anything to add?
Yeah, I have a question. When you talk related to what you were just saying, what about
Yeah.
budgetary implications? Are we trying to come up with recommendations that are at no cost, or?
No, you're getting exactly to what I'm thinking about. I don't think that you should be trying to figure out where, things have budgetary implications. I don't think that is your job to try and figure out where that money will come from or mark things off the list because they cost money. That's really the town board's job, is to prioritize funding in the budget. We're wrapping up that process right now. And so that's a mouthy way of saying no.
And when you say you're wrapping up that process now, there's room to change that based on our recommendations?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. So these recommendations won't, that's a great question as far as timing goes. So the town board will vote on, we are required by the law to pass our budget ordinance before the 1st of July. So we will be meeting on Monday to pass the budget ordinance for the next year. So this board, we're going to come back together in August, and we will talk about the recommendations that each smaller group has come up with. I imagine we'll converse about those together. And I'm imagining coming up with, one list. And then that will need to go into some kind of report that is then reported out to the town board at a meeting in the fall. So depending on whether that discussion about recommendations takes 1 meeting or 2 meetings, it could be, October, November before that presentation is made to the board. Does that answer your question, Sujata?
So yes, it does. So most likely if there's a budgetary implication, then the recommendation wouldn't be implemented until July of next year.
Well, I think that's a question that I just can't give a definitive answer to, because throughout the year, opportunities will arise, or things will, so we approve the budget, right? But you can't perfectly predict the future. So then throughout the year, things might come up, departments might really need something, or it's a special opportunity. And so sometimes the town board will make mid-year adjustments. So that kind of thing isn't unprecedented. I think I just couldn't, without knowing I couldn't guarantee the timing. I guess that's what I'm saying. Because the board would also need to have discussions about, priorities and how much whatever the thing is. Does that?
Mayor,
Help
if I
at
could
all?
chime in,
Yes.
just to Josh's point, and for everybody to know, if something comes out of this that needs to be done, this town has always demonstrated the ability to figure out a way to make it happen. So while budgets are set things, we have a lot of options. Unless it's something insanely expensive, I would have no doubt we'd find a way to make it happen.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Okay. So I believe the last thing that we need to do is think about how to make the groups. And the simplest thing might be for Eli and I to get for sure clarity about what our hard number is of people. And then we could just make the groups. Do people feel comfortable with that? Okay.
Do we want to decide how we're going to split up these 2 into topics? Like, do we think that 2 make sense together and 2 others make sense together?
Sure. Yes, I think we should do that. Any suggestions?
I think possibly HPD practices and use of force might make sense together, and traffic stops and mental health calls make sense together. I don't know if anyone else has thoughts.
All right. I think that I will also offer up that I think it is fine if there's a particular one of these that any of you feel really strongly about that you would really hope you could work on. Please feel free to just shoot an email to myself and Eli. And I think it's fine to try and make that happen, and also know we're all adults and we can probably handle, wherever we land. So don't hesitate to do that if there's something you really want to work on. Oh, I also wanted to mention this, and we can share this when we send a follow-up email out to other group members, is that if anyone needs to have anything on hard copy, then please let us know, because I know there's sometimes when folks are just using their phones, and not everyone might not have access to a laptop or a desktop that gives you a bigger screen. So just reach out if you need those materials.
And I can put everything in one place and send a link that people would be able to access all the files in one location.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Eli, I had just been control find you and your name every time I wanted to find something, so that would be perfect if you could do it that way. Because you're the one who cares. Yeah, that was how I was finding all of my material. So that would.
Yeah, it's they're all posted. Everything is pretty much on the town's website, but it can be cumbersome to find all the different places where things are. So I have it all together, and I'll send that link.
Thank you, Eli. Oh no, now I've really, I think I'm going to stop sharing for now. So if you're going to do that, so one of the things Eli and I had discussed ahead of time is I was going to share my screen and kind of walk through how to find the minutes. But if Eli is going to put everything in one link, maybe that won't be necessary.
Probably not. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Anything else before we part? Hathaway.
Yeah. One other thing that I was thinking about was I know that last night I didn't get a chance to watch it. I was able to see some of the materials, but Jacqueline Gilstrap and Paris Miller-Fushi posted. They presented last night. I think actually Jacqueline did last night. Chapel Hill's report, and both of them are friends of mine, and I'm going to reach out to them. I might try to see if I can do some type of call with them or something. I don't want, I know they've done a lot of work, obviously, to get where they just did. I don't know if they want to take a break, but I'd love to get more info from them. And it might be something that, it could be something where a number of us who want to join to kind of have a conversation with them from what they learned on that process. I thought that might be helpful because they're both so talented at what they do. And I'm going to, as I said, I'm going to review everything they did, but I'd love to hear from them as to the, if they have any tips for us as we are now starting to do the work that of all the information that was provided to us.
That would be awesome. That'd be great to either share what you learn or see if other folks want to join you too. That would be terrific. Thank you. And also, I will be sure that a link to their report also goes out to everybody in the group as well. Okay. Well, thanks. That's a lot of logistics. I really appreciate it. And I'll send around the document that I was scrolling through as well. And we'll get the groups made. And, you know, it's one of those things, and I'm speaking for myself, who I work best with deadlines and still end up doing things at the last minute. So just know that the time between now and August 12th will probably go slowly and then quickly. But anyway, we can be of assistance to helping, you know, facilitate folks getting together or, you know, information, you know, finding group members, like any of that kind of stuff. Don't hesitate to reach out. All right. Well, thanks everyone.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yes, Sujata, go
I
ahead.
think it might be helpful to have our first meeting set up for us, if it's not too much work. And then take it from there to set up our own for the following month.
Can you say a little bit more? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I just, after you form the groups, it might be, we might wait for each other to like set up our first meeting. So it might just speed up the process if Eli or you can set up our first meeting for us, and then we can take it from there.
Okay, I think that would be fine. I think the question is timing. So it could be, yeah, Eli, you have a great idea.
It might make sense to go ahead and suggest that the small groups meet July 8th, which was when this group was originally scheduled to meet. And then, you know, if there's enough people that can't make it that night, we can work on finding another date, but we could start with that just so that we have a starting place.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Great. Thank you. That's a good idea. Okay. All right. Well, if we have no other business, then this meeting can be adjourned. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.